Hi, I'm Kathleen Lewis, Stewardship Manager for the San Juan Preservation Trust. Welcome to the San Juan Islands Western Bluebird Project Volunteer Video Training Series. This is going to be the second video in our training series. In this video, we'll be covering a year in the life of a bluebird monitor. Basically, what you should be planning for as we move through the seasons. Then I'll specifically go over how to spot a western bluebird in the field. And we'll show you plenty of photos and video along the way to help you learn to ID these birds if you've never laid eyes on them before, or if you're new to birding and you think your skills need some polishing. However, before we launch into how we monitor for bluebirds, it's really important to understand why we are monitoring them. Monitoring banded western bluebirds helps us add to a growing data set that tells us a lot about the population, return rates after migration, survivability of adults and juveniles, breeding success, fledging rates, dispersal rates to other bluebird populations, and sex ratios. Knowing these things about these birds tells us if this reintroduction project can be considered a success. If we had simply released birds with no ongoing monitoring program, we would have no way of knowing if this pioneering project achieved its goal of recovering western bluebirds in the San Juan Islands. Your work as a bluebird monitor will help add to this growing body of data. It's important to remember that this is the first migratory songbird reintroduction of its kind undertaken in the United States. So consider yourself on the cutting edge of community science. Okay, now it's time to take you through the calendar year so that you'll know what to expect as the year progresses. Beginning in early winter, January and February, be watching island-wide for overwintering western bluebirds and report any sightings. Late February is the deadline for having all nest boxes cleaned out and ready to accept new occupants. Bluebirds have a strong preference for an empty nest cavity, so you'll increase your chances of an occupant if the box is cleaned. Boxes should also be predator-proofed and in good condition, not rotted or cracked, and with doors that open and close securely. In March and April, bluebirds start arriving in the islands. Time to make regular visits to your territory or be watching at your own box for arriving bluebirds. Keep in mind, many often arrive in one area earlier and then select other areas for nesting. May and July, the bulk of your monitoring will occur during these months. You'll want to know who is nesting in your boxes. If they all get occupied by other species, you don't need to continue monitoring unless you want to. If you are lucky to get bluebirds in your territory, however, the fun begins. Regular visits to determine clutch size, hatching rate, fledging rate, parental behavior, all will be necessary and fun. If you don't wind up getting bluebirds on your assigned route, but would like to watch a box in a different area, please contact me and I can reassign you. If you like, you can also participate in the process of banding the young. In August and September, the breeding season is largely over. Time to revisit the boxes, clean them out, make any repairs, and check predator proofing. Bluebirds will start forming larger flocks and moving about the island in preparation for migration in the fall, although some will overwinter. All right, so now that you know what to expect as the year rolls through, let's discuss the best way to find bluebirds in the field. Let's focus on that early springtime when bluebirds are first arriving, and it's time to start searching for them on your assigned territory or on one of our scheduled bluebird blitzes, which are organized search parties that we typically schedule for March and April of every year. If you've offered to take on one or several territories to monitor, you'll be provided with a map and the landowner contact information, and all this information will be provided to you in advance of the season. It's a good idea to make contact with the landowner each year to make sure they know you'll be out to observe and to note any changes in land ownership. Please remember that the majority of our bluebirds nest on private land, and we have dozens of folks participating in this project. But it is voluntary, and folks can withdraw at any time. Establishing and keeping good relations with the landowners and sharing the wonder of bluebirds with them is paramount to the ongoing success of this project. Be respectful of their individual requests for how to access their property and any other constraints, for instance, going into fields where there are livestock. This also is a good time to do a final check on the nest boxes on the property to make sure they are ready to go for the season. Before you head out in the field, make sure you have the right equipment. A good pair of binoculars, any brand will do, but 10x40 optics are really the best for wildlife watching. Or a spotting scope, if you have one, is helpful. Also, be sure to have a notebook and pencil with you to record any information. If necessary, this data can be entered into the spreadsheet later. Don't assume you'll remember. When you go out in the field, the first thing to do is to search in the right habitat. Bluebirds are a species of open country. Agricultural areas, meadows, fields, oak woodlands, and even neighborhoods or golf courses if there are short grasses and low to mid-story perches for them to hunt from. Search along fence posts, on top of nest boxes, at the tops of trees, ends of prominent branches, or on the peaks of buildings. They are distinctive, proud perchers, which makes them relatively easy to spot compared to many songbirds. They also have a unique foraging habit, hovering like a kingfisher above the ground in search of insects. No other songbird in our region does this. They will most often glean insects from the ground and then fly right back to a low perch to eat them. You won't find these birds in dense woodlands or conifer forests or brushy riparian areas, so you can leave these areas out of your searching entirely. We've already shown you some photos of western bluebirds in our first video, but who can get enough of those? So here are some more. To review, male bluebirds have a stunning royal blue back, tail feathers, and head with a rusty red wash on the breast. Females are more gray overall, with a distinctive white eye-ring and slaty blue feathers on the wings and tail. Juveniles can be distinguished by the spotted vest that is signature of all young in the thrush family. These spots will fade by the end of the year, and by their return in the spring, they will have their full adult plumage and be ready for breeding. So, when is a blue bird not a bluebird? In our islands, the tree swallow is most often mistaken for a western bluebird by excited observers. They also nest in cavities and occupy the same habitat as bluebirds. However, as you can see, the male tree swallow is quite different. The blue on the back is a dark navy blue, and he has an almost all-white breast. Their flight patterns and behaviors overall are quite different. If you are new to bluebirding, be sure to learn the key differences between these species. Another great way to ID bluebirds, but which requires a bit more practice, is learning their calls. Western bluebirds are different than many of the songsters in the thrush family. If you're familiar with the haunting melodies of the American robin or the Swainson's thrush or the hermit thrush, you'll know what I mean. Their song is really a strung together series of short calls and warbles. However, I can tell you that once you know that sound, there's nothing else that sounds like them. So let's say you've located a western bluebird and you're certain of the ID. The next step is to attempt to record the color bands on the bird's legs, if indeed they are banded. These identified leg bands help us track each bird's fate. Most birds will have 4 bands, 1 aluminum band with a Fish and Wildlife number on it, and 3 color bands. These are all in a unique combination, and they are recorded as left leg from top to bottom, then right leg from top to bottom. Do know that these bands can be difficult to nail down. It may take you several visits to get 100% confirmation. Another way to do it is to try to photograph the bird with a good camera, and we can always identify it later. Another possibility is that you will locate unbanded western bluebirds in our population. These are likely returning birds from clutches that were not discovered the previous year and therefore not banded, or perhaps recruits from outside the population. We will just simply note them as unbanded. It is important, as always, to remember to keep a good, comfortable distance from the birds. Don't chase them, and if they move off away from their perch, wait for them to settle back down again before slowly approaching. Regardless if you're able to record all the color bands or not, it is important for you to contact me immediately so that we can make a plan for what happens next. In our next video, we'll review the nest box monitoring process, including the behaviors to look for to help you determine where in the breeding process the birds are and how to properly track the developing nest and nestlings. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.